10 books on writing and creativity every author should ask for this holiday season. This one is by me, Jay Wilburn. All right. I'm going to read through and I'll make comments as they fit in, but I'll not over elaborate, I suppose, depending on if there's something new to add to it. Authors tend to run hot and cold on writing classes and writing books. Some people swear by them, other writers are either dubious or bordering on hostile toward them. I'm not positive, but I believe these opinions are tied in part to other writing debates about what makes someone a real writer, what paths to publishing are most honorable, whether you should call yourself a writer or an author, or if it's realistic to become a full-time writer-author. Those controversies are pretty stiff in the writing community. Authors that are full-time authors, such as myself, when we talk about following your dreams and some high-minded stuff like that, authors that are working day jobs who don't feel like they have that option will sometimes get hostile with that sort of discussion. It's almost like one side feels like they're being told they're not really brave enough to pursue their dreams. The other side kind of feels like they're being accused of not being responsible with their lives. And with all those kind of debates in writing, they get very personal. So I think sometimes the idea of taking writing classes or getting a writing degree, I think also the idea of whether writing books are worth your time, I believe all those things can be hot button issues for some people because they get tied up in the discussion. I consider my day job a safety net in case I don't make it. I think that's fine. I never advise anybody to quit their day job like I did, but I don't discourage it either necessarily. It does take some creative financing. The money is not steady, so I have several sources of income. I'm working on Twitch as a very big beginner because there's potential for it to become something else. Patreon makes me a little bit of money. Writing these articles makes me a little bit of money. I do a little bit of ghostwriting as well because my medical bills are kind of high, so I need that additional source of income. And then over time, slowly, my own writing kind of picked up. So again, like that kind of lifestyle, and my family, we try to live pretty lean, so we're not taking a bunch of vacations. We don't spend money extravagantly or anything like that. So we try to keep everything in budget. We live in South Carolina in a town that has a fairly low cost of living, so our rent is fairly low for a decent house and that kind of thing. So all of that stuff plays in. I'm happy with being a full-time writer, but again, it's not like my path was this honorable path and everyone else is coming up short or anything like that. But again, those kind of become arguments. Sometimes the wording of how those discussions go get people very upset because one side or the other feels like they're being accused of something. It's not easy, and it's probably smarter to keep the day job and then work on writing as you build up, especially if it's a job that you like. A lot of people hate their jobs, and that makes it that much tougher as they're pursuing a writing dream. All right. I'm not going to dive into the controversies or opinions mentioned above. I guess I did here, but not in the article. I'm not going to discuss classes or degrees this time around either. I am going to talk about writing and creativity books, though. Got a writing degree in 2016 and only really made real honest attempts at writing this past October. It's cool to start, though. Everybody kind of starts at different times. I'm always kind of blown away by some of the people that have achieved a lot in sort of my peer group who started writing really young. I'm impressed by that because it took me longer. I was into my 30s before I was trying to write professionally. I'd always done it as a kid, but never seriously beyond that. I've known a bunch of writers who started later, and then I went full time later too. So I don't think starting late is a bad thing. And sometimes it's just best. You always kind of look back and you're like, oh, if I just started this earlier, or this earlier, or this earlier, I'd be this much further ahead. And I don't know that plays out because it doesn't really fit that part of your life. Like it took me a while to get to the point where I'm at now, where I consider myself at a particular level of strength in writing, and I need to get even better than that. But if I had backed that up a few years, I would be even worse at what I was doing. So some of the life experience and then some of the practice I think was necessary for me to even be at a place where I could pursue it realistically. So it's always tempting to say, oh, if only I'd started 5 years earlier, my life would be so different. But in fact, it probably was a better time to start later because you're bringing more to the table, I think. So kind of a no regrets kind of discussion, I guess. I do think finding methods to consistently and continually improve your craft as a writer is important. Which methods work best probably cuts along the mentality of the individual, their personality, past experience, and their openness to the process. I find the written word has the most impact on me emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. Reading fiction and nonfiction improves my toolbox as an author almost as much as the regular practice of writing itself. A few writing, craft, and process books loom large in my mind and heart. Some of it has to do with the time in my life in which I read them. I imprinted my emotional and mental state at the time upon the work as I strove to learn from it. Others I had to do with the stature of the author giving the advice and guidance. Many of them were inherently good, useful books on writing or the creative process. If you're tough to shop for, or you're just tired of getting mugs and t-shirts that say, "Be careful, if you make me mad, I'll kill you in my story," then these writing and creativity books may be the thing to ask for this holiday season. All right, the first one is Ink Stained, and this is my favorite one. I've been recommending this for a long time. Ink Stained on Creativity, Writing, and Art by John Urbansek discusses finding inspiration in anything you pursue. John Urbansek is an accomplished author and photographer. He is, in my opinion, the greatest short story writer living or dead. He's still living, by the way. I follow his Patreon page. My favorite John Urbansek story is always the next one I read. This book is packed full of insights on life in writing and the creative process. If you only get one book on this list, this is it. I really do like this book. He had a podcast for a while, and a lot of the chapters and discussion he pulled from that podcast over time. He has just a unique way of thinking and looking at the world. He works with different media, so some of the discussion is specific to writing, but a lot of it is just broadly about creativity and the artistic process. So that's a good book whether you're a writer or not. The second one is very strong too, Writing in the Dark by Tim Wagner. I always try to say his name Wagoneer, but when he pronounces it, he says Wagner, and I have to remember that I'm saying it wrong. The moment I heard Writing in the Dark was coming, I knew I was going to buy it, and it did not disappoint. I've been following Wagner's writing for years and the great advice he has given online. He is a successful author and has made a name for himself in media tie-ins in particular. He also teaches writing on the collegiate level. His students are lucky to have a teacher who has lived the craft so successfully. This book could be a textbook, except that it is too interesting and practical, and I'm not sure colleges like that sort of thing. There's a lot of there's a lot of just practical application exercises in that book, and you can tell that he has great experience with explaining process to somebody. So whereas authors can kind of tell you what they do, the fact that he is a teacher and a wildly successful author in the areas that he works allows him to do both. He has firsthand experience and he knows how to get it across, and I think that book is good. His Writing in the Dark is also a blog series that he does, so you can find it, Writing in the Dark. If you look it up, you'll probably find the book online a lot because it's popular now, but his blog, Writing in the Dark, is worth following, and a lot of this material kind of built off of what he had done over the years with that. He also does YouTube channel. I can't remember his YouTube channel off the top of my head, but I've seen some videos from him recently that I always like because he knows what he's talking about. All right, On Writing by Stephen King, number 3. This order of going from first to 10th is just something that Lit Reactor does. I did a countdown the other way, 10 going down to 1, and they flipped the numbers on me. So I've always done just 1 to... On Lit Reactor, I always go 1 up, and then when I'm writing on my own blog, I do it like a countdown. But so I go from best to 10th best or whatever on a lot of my Lit Reactor articles. Okay, On Writing by Stephen King. A lot of you probably guessed On Writing would be on this list. I quit teaching in 2013 to become a full-time writer and to care for my son who was sick. My wife bought me this book on my birthday a couple months later. I read it in those heady days when life was still surreal from not having a day job anymore. I was desperate to succeed and I felt like the book had too much information to take in. I read it again recently and found it concise and practical. I suppose I became a different person between readings. Some of the publishing advice for beginning authors is dated and skewed by Stephen King's position on top of a $400 million mountain, but it holds up and the principles are still sound. It really was like reading a different book the second time. The first time I read it in small pieces. I was trying to take everything in. I was new to full time writing, and I just felt like there was too much to remember. There's biographical stuff in there about him too. That's very fascinating. But in the second reading, it was just very concise. There was no wasted. There was just no wasted space in the book, and everything was very simple and straightforward. So I guess my mind was just at a different place. The internet changed the craft of writing completely, and that's a good point about this one and probably a couple others on the list. His process. He talks about a smaller author, not by name, but a smaller author who is going through the process of trying to get published for the first time, and so he's going by someone else's experience that's not at the level he is on the chapters where he talks about that. But again, it's still kind of the mail-in submission process and kind of an old school sort of the traditional publishing path kind of thing, and it didn't take into account everything from Twitch to Patreon to ebooks. I was actually reading. I'm rereading all his books in order, and I'm up to Everything's Eventual. And at the beginning of that book, he talks about a short story that he released as an electronic book, and this was written about in 2000 2001 range, actually 2001 around 2002. And Stephen King released an e-book short story that did amazingly well, and he was talking about ebooks like it was this alien thing that he was the first one to try or whatever. And it read funny because of course ebooks are just, as you know, are right beside paperback books as one of the formats. Do you think the internet's ability to let writers sidestep the traditional process is helpful, or does it just flood the market with mediocre stories? I think both are true. And most of my income comes from self-publishing, and I guess technically I'm a hybrid writer because I do have books with small publishers. I don't have any books with big four companies. I don't have an agent, anything like that. I do make a little bit of money off of Patreon. I make money from direct sales from my website. I make a good bit from direct sales from my website. And then, of course, I'm trying to build up Twitch and see what potential is there. But I do find it interesting because some of my favorite stories are indie writers, people who kind of bypass the gatekeepers and put a story out there. And it turns out to be these really unique tales that I don't think a lot of publishers would have picked up on. At the same time, around those gems of stories, again, you have all the mediocre, and worse than mediocre, you have terrible stories. So a lot of times you have to search. When I do find something good, I try to tell everybody about it, so that some of these great stories in there stand out. As a self-published author, I've worked very hard to find editors I can rely on, artists that put the work together. I hire people to help format and make sure the books are done as professionally as they can. And even then, there's some quality breaks. I've had to break away from editors who miss too many things, and typos show up. Unfortunately, they show up in too many books now, even some of the big press ones, in ways that they didn't used to in the 70s and 80s, early 90s. But when they show up in a self-published book, it stands out because there's such a low bar for entrance that the format has a bad reputation, and it's an earned bad reputation. So I always strive to, at the very least, not contribute to that when it comes to my own work. The big publishers are a big stamp of approval. I know a few authors that are with those big publishers, sometimes with an imprint off to the side from them. So there is great work that comes from them. I do think that sometimes it leans towards safe stories, even when you're dealing with horror and things of that nature. And a lot of times, if you find self-published work, even self-published work by some of those authors that are with the big, I guess it's big four now. They're with the big four. Their self-published work tends to be more out to the edge, and they're being more experimental than they are with the traditionally published stuff. So a lot of times when I'm looking for something new, I start digging through that pile of self-published and indie work to try to find the gems that are in there. All right, Story by Robert McGee. Story, Substance, Structure, Style, and Principles of Screenwriting by Robert McGee is a screenwriting book, but prose authors can learn a ton from this work. S.A. Cosby, he's another example of an author that's doing very well through the traditional publishing route. S.A. Cosby reminded me of this book recently when I interviewed him for my podcast. Cosby is a crime fiction writer who has made a huge impact. Stephen King has mentioned Cosby's work twice. After rereading Story, I see where Cosby applied these principles to his novels to create amazing scenes, twists, characters, and action. This book could change the quality of your work in a big way. S.A. Cosby wrote Blacktop Wasteland, which has gotten a lot of attention, and the way that I can't predict which way the story's going to go, the way that the characters seem so three-dimensional, I can see how he used this particular book to elevate his novel writing, and so I revisited this book to see if I could do a little better myself. Sweat the Technique by Rakim. Sweat the Technique discusses the creative process from the viewpoint of legendary rapper Rakim. I read it in paperback, but he narrates the audiobook himself, and it might be worth it to experience the book that way. It's both a memoir and a writing guide. The insights on drawing from influences, finding your voice and style, and practical guidance on writing are like sitting at the feet of a genius storyteller. So again, Rakim is a rapper he's kind of credited with being old school in setting up where hip-hop was going to go in the future, but has stayed relevant, and this book is amazingly insightful to just the creative process, and of course there's no arguing that he knows what to do with words. All right, number 6, A Writer's Tale by Richard Lehman. Before I read this one, you just got to know this one's out of print and out of reach, but I brought it up because it did mean a lot to me when I read it. You just can't find it online, and they want ridiculous amounts of money for it if you do find it. All right, whoever buys you this one must love you very much, because A Writer's Tale is out of print and really hard to find. When you do find it, it's expensive. I probably should have excluded it from the list, but I read it many years ago and found it useful and motivating. I borrowed it from someone who has since passed, and I believe that copy was sold shortly after that. Brian Keene reminded me about this book, and the next one on the list. Keene tweeted about Writing Craft books a while back. I couldn't find the tweet, and he kindly retweeted his list for me. If you can ever find a copy, it's a special book for a lot of reasons. All right, Welcome to Hell by Tom Piccirilli. Brian Keene reminded me about Welcome to Hell, a working guide for the beginning writer by Tom Piccirilli. 2. It is short and inexpensive. The book uses Piccirilli's life and career as a case study for authors to both imitate and avoid from episode to episode, so he tells you things he's done wrong, things he's done right. The details are not universal, and it is not a step-by-step guide to a writing career, but the principles and lessons are sound and can be adapted to many different career paths. So there are experiences in there that are unique to him that I don't think apply widely, but in terms of just kind of getting a case study on a writing career, I think it's valuable. All right, number 8, Where Nightmares Come From by Crystal Lake Publishing. So this one is sort of a conglomeration of works from different authors put together by Crystal Lake, who always puts out good stuff. Where Nightmares Come From, the art of storytelling in the horror genre, is part of the Dream Weaver series of books from Crystal Lake Publishing. I don't know how many of those are out, so there's more than more than, I think there's two or three, but I'm going off the top of my head. This is the first one, and I think it's the best one. But that's not a mark on the others. I think all of them are good because they do a good job of curating the very best essays from the very best authors. It contains great essays from some of the most important and skilled storytellers in horror. Even if you are not primarily a horror author, these essays can serve anyone in writing tension, conflict, mystery, action, and more. All right, number 9, The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. The War of Art, Break Through the Blocks and Win Your Inner Creative Battles, is a great book for creatives stuck in a rut or otherwise displeased with their process and what they are producing. If you are at a point of struggle and need help getting through it, that's what this book is about. Many of the books higher on this list can help with that too, I believe. This book is probably the most to the side of the actual writing process of the ones I have on here. It kind of talks about art more broadly, and it's sort of a wider view, more of an existential sort of exploration of art, but in a way that kind of makes it strong and unique on this list. And lastly, number 10, On Writing Horror, a handbook by the Horror Writers Association. On Writing Horror has very good essays from some of the strongest horror authors at the time of its publication. The detailed advice, examples, and exercises are timeless and helpful. It is better for horror-centric writers, but can work for adjacent genres as well. It is not the strongest or best book on this list, but I wouldn't have included it if it wasn't worth the read. And then closing off the article here, I said, we should always strive to be better at what we love and what we are called to do. We benefit by seeking inspiration wherever it can best be found. For us, these books might be the answer for you at a time in your writing life when you find yourself seeking the way forward. Good luck and good writing.